Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us. I'd like to begin today's press conference first by expressing my heartfelt support for our off-duty Chicago police officer who was shot in the leg last night during an attempted robbery. This incident comes on the heels of a different Chicago police officer that was shot in the line of duty early Monday morning, responding to a domestic dispute. Luckily, in the second one, his protective vest stopped a bullet that hit his shoulder. And I'm pleased to report that both the officers are doing fine, and I believe that they are scheduled to be released from the hospital. We are here today to provide greater details on the city's robust response to the COVID-19 crisis, but also we are here to talk about the significant budgetary challenges we are facing as a result of the COVID-19 crisis, as well as how our city plans to appropriate the funds that we have received and will be receiving from the CARES Act. As I said before, nothing about this moment that we are in is ordinary or easy. And that's been true since COVID-19 came to Chicago, which seems like now many, many months ago. And particularly what we've experienced in the wake of the murder of George Floyd really highlights the importance of this moment and the conversations that are happening not only here in Chicago, but really across the country. And though we have taken our first promising steps into phase 3 to gradually reopen the city, I will remind you, as Dr. Arty does every day, that COVID-19 is far from over. This crisis is historic and unprecedented, and I could probably conjure up a few more adjectives, but the reality is we have not seen anything like this in our lifetime, and it has had a devastating impact on our communities and businesses, particularly communities of color. There have been and will continue to be no easy answers, and we will continue to have to make hard choices and decisions. However, in this moment has also revealed the promise and the power of our city. We've seen our resiliency and our mettle, our ability to join together and support one another, which has been crucial to help us survive what we've experienced over these last 10+ weeks, and is going to be crucial to how we move forward together. It's got to be that we are united. Regardless of where we come from, what neighborhood we live in, we have to remember that we are each other's business. As we move forward, we will continue to be guided by our values of equity, inclusion, and transparency in everything that we do, whatever challenges we face, as well as our shared commitment to engaging in a collaborative process that draws on a range of voices across our city. That's one of the things I'm most proud of in my young administration, that we go out, we solicit the input and the partnership of people whose lived experience must inform the work that we do. And part of that collaborative process really is reflected in the women who are here with me today. Susie Park, our budget director, our comptroller, Reshma Soni, our chief financial officer, Jenny Wong Bennett, as well as Allison Arwady, our commissioner of public health, who's been a critical voice in guiding us where we need to direct our funding and our policy related to COVID-19. She's there. And that's in addition to our leaders really across the city, including city council members. We will need all of these voices and yours and more as we work to tackle the significant and widespread financial challenges related to COVID-19, which are immense. Now, many people in the media and across the city have been wondering what the financial impact of COVID-19 closures has been on city revenues. And the reality is it's been significant. And with the April numbers now in, we are projecting that the 2020 budget shortfall will be close to $700 million. That's a sobering number, and it presents a sobering challenge any way you look at it. We also have to say that the surge in COVID-19 cases, if there's an additional surge in COVID-19 cases, that shortfall could potentially widen even further. Now, the reasons behind this gap are what you might expect and are being experienced throughout the country and certainly here in our region. Like other large cities, we've seen a sharp decline in our revenues for 2020, particularly those that are economically sensitive, like amusement, hotel, parking, and restaurant tax, just to name a few. In the aggregate, even though those taxes are only 25% of our budget, they nevertheless, the close of restaurants and hotels and other service industries over the last 2 months has had a devastating impact. It's not just the businesses themselves being closed, it's that the workers having little or no income to spend them on themselves and to take care of their needs and further support other businesses. All of our revenue streams have taken a hit, not just those. What we have seen is a complete change in consumer behavior as a result of COVID-19, the stay-at-home order, and other things that have affected the way in which people are consuming goods and services. People aren't driving, and they're just not consuming goods and services in the same way. Now, our $700 million budget shortfall for 2020 is conservative, in part because no one can predict with any accuracy now how a recovery will take hold, when it will take hold, and how fast it will be before we start returning to pre-COVID-19 economic conditions. And the inability of really anyone, any economic prognosticator, to predict where the local and national economy will rebound is a challenge in and of itself. Our numbers show that losses for March and April alone reached $175 million, and we expect a similar loss for the month of May. These months, of course, were those when we were sheltering in place in order to prevent a potentially catastrophic spread of COVID-19. And let's just keep in mind, while this budget shortfall is grim, what would have been worse is if we would have seen more people die and more people infected with the virus if we hadn't sheltered in place. The figure of $700 million itself is based on both the depth of the revenue loss during months in shelter in place, as well as assumptions about the speed of recovery. So in short, this is our projection through the end of the year. Nonetheless, we will continue to evaluate our revenues every month as we have been. And the steps we'll be taking to close our shortfall include using the $100 million extra in refinancing savings that was secured at the beginning of the year, as well as working to identify additional refinancing savings when market conditions change and improve. We'll also be looking to see further savings within departments, and that work has already begun. Things like reprioritizing hires for 2020 and looking at other savings that we can net this year and maybe push off projects to an out year. Ultimately, though, all options, including raising property taxes and layoffs, have to remain on the table. Those are the last choices and tools that I want to use, but I can't take any of them off the table. Now, this projection comes as we embark on the process of establishing how we as a city will use the $1.3 billion we're receiving from the CARES Act. In order to do so, we will be seeking City Council approval to appropriate 8 CARES Act grants, which will provide needed assistance across multiple investment areas. But we have to be clear about this. CARES Act money is available to address COVID response, not new money and new programming, to address COVID response, and is mostly non-discretionary in nature, meaning we have a limited ability to use that money to fund certain programs. It is not, underscore not, meant to address budget shortfalls. And as we have been diligent in reporting, we have incurred significant COVID-related expenses, such as expenses for quarantine and isolation facilities, testing, PPE, case investigation, reopening costs, supports for small businesses, and other COVID-related expenses. We also, of course, preparing for a second surge and possibly an interim surge based upon the number of people that have been out gathering in recent weeks. And other new costs we will surely incur until there is a viable vaccine. We have to be prudent in how we use these monies so that we continue to be prepared, which has been our hallmark and our saving grace throughout the entirety of our response to COVID-19. Taken together, the resources from the CARES Act will be used to support our ongoing response to COVID-19. But also, use of these resources, we have to strike a very delicate balance in meaningfully addressing all of the critical needs of our city. And so what we are proposing and presenting to the council includes $43 million towards housing assistance to help our families keep up their rent and mortgage payments, preventing homelessness, and providing rapid rehousing. $35 million for small businesses who have been working desperately to stay open. $4.5 million towards food assistance, and I should say these are on top of the investments that we already made in 2020. $10 million more for mental health services to help residents who are clearly traumatized, feeling isolated, alone with the challenges of COVID-19. NAMI Chicago, which staffs one of the hotlines, has seen a 266% increase in calls for mental health services since the stay-at-home order went into effect. We are also proposing to invest $10 million more for violence prevention. We know that in order to address public safety holistically, we need a whole, all-in approach. And that means making sure that we are investing in community members who have walked in the shoes of some of the young men that are involved in the violence and are most equipped to talk to them, to de-escalate, and bring them out of this spiral of violence. So we're investing there and investing in community organizations that work on these issues every day and are embedded in these communities is vitally important. And of course, $10 million for workforce development. With the number of people that are out of work, filing for unemployment, and are feeling like they don't have a pathway to a good job, it is incumbent upon us to make sure that we're putting even more money into training and development so we prepare our workers for the jobs of today and tomorrow. Now, we need to realize that this support is about more than just COVID-19 itself. It stands as our latest recommitment to our communities who are hungry and crying for resources. And stands as the latest step in our shared mission that truly began 12 months ago to bring real investment to all of our 77 neighborhoods. And to build a Chicago where everyone has equal chance at the future and an equal chance to succeed. In our 2020 budget, despite having to address what was then the largest gap in the city's history, we still made critical increased investments in affordable housing, mental health, anti-violence, and other critical needs that totaled $50 million. So the investments that we propose to make, based upon our ability to use CARES Act funding, really is consistent with the values that we laid out last year, even in the midst of a substantial budget gap. The funds from the CARES Act continues those investments in all the areas we've seen critical needs, especially given the impact of COVID-19 on our communities. I want to take this moment to also give special thanks to our Illinois congressional delegation in Washington, D.C., and particularly those members who touched Chicago. I want to call out in particular our great senators, Senator Dick Durbin and Tammy Duckworth, along with other members of the delegation who have not only solicited our feedback, but have been willing to listen and to put our request into action in helping us get through this incredibly difficult time. And we're going to need to lean into them even more in the critical months ahead. And as I said earlier, nothing about this moment is ordinary, and it will continue to require us to make some very difficult decisions. Our businesses have been suffering, and many of our small businesses, unfortunately, have been forced to close. Case in point, our small businesses hire over half of Chicago's employees and generally have only 28 days of cash on hand. But that number drops to only 17 days of cash on hand for our small businesses on the South and the West Side. That's under normal circumstances, and nothing's normal about now. So it's no surprise that thousands of our workers have either lost their hours or been laid off. Meanwhile, our families have lost loved ones, and we've been separated from our friends. And our Black and Latinx communities have disproportionately borne the brunt of COVID-19 infections and deaths. This is absolutely an incredibly challenging moment for our city. But I also want to look at this moment as a call to action, an opportunity for us to think about what we've gained, even in this difficult time. While COVID-19 has impacted our entire city, and it exacerbated deep fissures that were already there and have been there for generations. It's a system of racism and inequality that has created the gulf in the rates of violence, trauma, and infection. Poverty and education, jobs and life expectancy, basic access to basic necessities like groceries and health care. We have lived too long being segregated by race and accepting that as the status quo, being isolated for opportunity, and leaving too many people feeling like they are trapped. One thing that I hope comes out of this entire experience, and it's already started, is that we must prioritize as a city, not just a city government, but as a city, as individuals, as families, as neighborhood, as community organizations, as a faith community. We must prioritize closing these divides once and for all, and embracing that we have to be in this together. That is not a quaint slogan, but we must figure out ways that we manifest that as a reality in our city everywhere. That is a critical call to action. And the good news is we are not starting from zero. In the city alone, city government alone, over the past 12 months, we have made key gains in our mission through initiatives like Invest Southwest, taking $750 million and investing in 10 key commercial corridors on the South and the West Side. Our investments in affordable housing and homelessness, mental health, and violence prevention, as well as through reforms like our fines and fees program designed to help working families and individuals just get a leg up. And through launching our STEP agenda, that's our poverty agenda, to directly combat poverty that is, I believe, killing us literally every single day. These past several months have forced us to realize just how connected we are, and that we truly must be in this together, and that we are far stronger together than we are apart. For all the challenges that we face, this is an incredible moment of hope. I talked about this last week, and it'll stay with me for the rest of my days. Driving around the South and West Side, seeing neighborhoods devastated by looting, shop owners literally crying tears because so much of their whole body and person was invested in setting up and running these businesses, only to see their hopes dashed. But even in the midst of that destruction, what I consistently heard people passing by on the street, business owners, members of chambers of commerce, and elected officials, is the hope and the resiliency that sets us apart from any place else in the world. I am confident because of those voices, because of those people who literally picked themselves up, got a broom, started cleaning up and rebuilding toward a new and better future, that we will be ever able to go forward stronger than we've ever been. But it's going to take diligence and determination, and everyone has to be a part of sharing that hope and belief for a better Chicago. I'm happy to take your questions at this time.
Mayor, thank you. Lots of questions about the police. Why don't we talk about those first?
Sure.
The folks are asking, multiple reporters are asking about defunding police. From David Grazing. What does the term defunding mean to you? Are you considering defunding as part of your ongoing police reform efforts? Is it possible to defund the Chicago Police Department and still meet the city's obligations under the court-sanctioned consent decree?
So let me start with the first part of your question. Is when I hear that, and we've heard that before, remember in the aftermath of the disclosure of the video of the killing of Laquan McDonald by Jason Van Dyke, we heard a similar cry in our city. The difference now is we're hearing it really across the nation. But when I hear that here, what I believe we're really talking about is what I ran on and why it's so important that we follow through on the commitment for the investments in black and brown neighborhoods that haven't seen any investment truly in decades. What people are saying, I think, is in too many communities across our city, particularly in black and brown Chicago, what they see every day is the manifestation of government is the police. What they want to see is true investment. What they want to see is a government who responds to the healthcare disparities, the life expectancy disparities, the fact that they can't walk to the store and get a cup of coffee or a good bag of groceries, that they don't feel like they've got a pipeline to good paying jobs. I agree with that. And that's why for the last 12 months, and as long as I'm mayor, we're going to continue to face the hard truths that have been ignored for way too long, and that we are going to make critical investments in neighborhoods, make it a reality. And that's precisely what we started to do last year and this year. We're going to keep our focus on co-curating a different kind of future for these communities with people on the ground in those communities. Now, the other thing that I think is important to keep in mind is because of what happened with Laquan McDonald, because of what happened with Quintonio LaGuerre and Betty Jones and way too many others, we've been on a path of reforming our police department for 5 years. And that journey continues. And of course, the consent decree has the potential, if we do it right, to be utterly transformative. But even beyond the consent decree, there are other things that we can and must do. Now, a lot of it is emphasis is around training and making sure that we have a truly professional, well-trained police force, not just from the academy. You know, I said this back in January, February of 16, when I learned that after police officers left the academy, there was no other mandatory annual training for them for the rest of their career. This city has completely turned that around, and more to come. We've revised our use of force order and retrained the entire department on it. Now, is it perfect? Obviously not. We're seeing some manifestations of real problems, and we will address those, but we are on the right path. We instituted mandatory body cameras. We instituted a policy, which I am pleased to say I helped draft, that within 60 days of a major incident, police shooting or something like that, it was mandatory to put out video, audio, and those initial police reports. And I emphasize those initial police reports because we wanted to send a message to officers that if the video doesn't match up with the narrative in your report, there's a problem. Play it straight, tell the truth, and that's why releasing those initial reports along with video and audio is so important. Now, I could go on, but there's a lot that has already been done. There's a lot more that needs to be done. We are aggressively attacking elements of the police contracts that are an anathema to reform and progress.
Greg Pratt from the Tribune wants to know, do you agree or disagree with the idea that police would have to deal with less crime if the city spent less on cops and more on education, mental health, and other programs?
So I don't think it's an either-or proposition. You know, as we outlined today, the investments that we are committed to making in violence reduction, in mental health, in affordable housing, in workforce development, we need to make those investments, period. And we've committed to that, even in the face of this 2020 budget. So it's not, for me, it's not an either-or proposition. We absolutely have to have reform and accountability of our police department, but equally imperative and urgent is the absolute necessity of investing in communities. Public safety is about a heck of a lot more than just cops in a car walking a beat. It is about building healthy, vibrant, safe neighborhoods, and we have to get there exactly through the investments that we're talking about. And when that happens, you see a community reborn. So what I've said from the very beginning of my time as mayor, we got to look at the root causes of the violence. We don't just lead and only have law enforcement. That's an important part, but it's also about building an ecosystem of healthy, vibrant, and then safe communities.
Bill Cameron wants to know, do you think any money in the police department budget should be reallocated to anything else?
Well, we've already actually reallocated a lot of the work that the police department had previously done. We don't need them to be the first responders on mental health crises. And so we're transitioning them away from that. We don't need them to be the people who are responding to every single social services need. We need the true professionals to be doing that, which is why we need to make these investments that I've outlined.
Fran Spielman from the Sun-Times, are you serious about the idea of licensing police officers? If so, what would it accomplish and how would it work?
Well, I do think it's an idea that we have to give serious consideration to. Here's why. If I go and get my nails done, which I don't do, you can probably tell, but if I did, the person who is handling my nails is licensed by the state. If I go get a haircut, the barber is licensed by the state. There's a uniformity in the professionalism, and then they have to recertify themselves on a regular basis. Why wouldn't we have that for police officers? I think it's an idea that we absolutely must discuss and debate because it makes sense.
Jennifer Struzik from the Fox here in Chicago. Could you react to the officer being relieved of his police duties after being caught on video flipping off protesters last week? Then why was that officer stripped of his police powers for giving a vulgar, offensive gesture when you, as the mayor of Chicago, told the president of the United States, F you? How is that any different?
I think there's a big difference. First of all, I'm a public official, and I coded my words. This officer is sworn to serve and protect the community, and in a heated circumstance, no doubt. But he went against his training, and he brought shame upon his department. I think there's a world of difference. I'm always going to speak my truth when it comes to the President of the United States, particularly when he is trying to foment, as he did last week, and if I'm honest, every day, violence in our streets. He's not a leader. He's not trying to bring us together. He's trying to divide us in everything that he does. And so, yes, I was dramatic in pushing back against him, but I will continue to fight what I see coming out of this White House every single day, which is racism, homophobia, xenophobia, trying to demonize our immigrants and refugees. Yes, ma'am, I am going to stand up and I'm going to push back against that every single time.
No regret for those words.
No regret.
Can we talk about this summer plans? Because the word is out of no Lollapalooza, no air show, no Taste of Chicago. Could you explain why?
Well, look, I think the explanation is rooted in our public health circumstances. We're still very much in COVID-19. It hasn't disappeared. Now, our time and attention has been elsewhere, but it's very much our present, and it's going to be our future until there is a viable vaccine, and we have no idea when that's going to happen. You think about Lollapalooza, and we've had extensive discussions with the owners of Lollapalooza, who are terrific people. But the reality is, bringing 100,000 people in mass, in close quarters, which is what the daily head count is every single day of Lollapalooza, bringing that many people from all over the country downtown in Grant Park every single day, we might as well just light ourselves on fire. It makes no sense. Given what we know about how this disease spreads, which is close, intimate contact extended over 10 minutes, realistically, we are not going to be in a position to have those kinds of large gatherings for some time. And it's heartbreaking because Lollapalooza is fun. All of our outdoor music festivals are fun. A lot of things about Chicago in the summertime are fun. And we are looking at ways, and I hope this doesn't get lost in the DCASE announcement, to do a lot of those performances virtually and still give people the opportunity to taste Chicago, no pun intended, but do it virtually. And we're also looking at some other alternatives where we can bring together people safely. There's a lot of interesting things that are going on really across the country, but also across the world, that I think that we will stand up here in Chicago in lieu of these large mass outdoor gatherings.
Greg Pratt is asking about Lala. Was there a payout from C3 Presents to the Chicago Park District or vice versa?
No.
Was the multi-year contract terminated in tandem?
No.
Was a later date considered?
We did consider a later date, and that was part of the discussion and why we delayed for so long. But it became clear that that later date probably wasn't going to get us out of the woods far enough away from where we are in the cycle of COVID-19 here in Chicago. So we look forward to welcoming them back next year.
The Park District's contract with C3 is due to expire. Is the city looking to renew it?
Yes.
And will any audience members be allowed at the 20-event DK series, which those in-person engagements, or is it all virtual?
We're going to emphasize virtual, but I think there'll be some opportunities for small groups to gather at some of these events.
Navy Pier is about to open.
Just the restaurants. There's been a lot of confusion about that. They're just opening the restaurants. It's not a free-for-all. All the activities there on Navy Pier are not going to be, that's at least my understanding, they're not going to be all open, just the restaurants, consistent with the guidance from both the city and the state.
As far as the lakefront, how soon? It does appear that folks have kind of inched their way on over.
Yeah, I see that. I hope to be able to announce it as soon as possible. I'm pressing my folks to finalize the plan, and then we need to socialize it with lots of different folks. But I'm anxious to make an announcement about reopening the lakefront.
Sarah Schulte is asking about the Riverwalk. There's apparently an understanding that some of the Riverwalk restaurants are about to open, and can you give us any more information about that?
We're really finalizing the details on that, so I don't want to get ahead of it. But we are looking to open up some of the restaurants safely, totally consistent with the overall guidance that we've given to other restaurants.
From WBEZ. The city seems to be going against its own public health guidance in allowing tens of thousands of people to gather during protests. It's also made an exception for religious gatherings to be larger than any other gathering. What is the legal or public health justification for making these exceptions after Illinoisans have heard for months about how important social distancing is?
Well, let me push back a little bit on the premise of that question. The protesters didn't come to me and say, Mayor, can we gather by the thousands in the street? This was a largely, I think, spontaneous outpouring of outrage and indignation at the murder of George Floyd. While I have told my loved ones they should stay home because of the risk of the spread of the virus, the reality is that if we had at all tried to curtail people's First Amendment rights, then the question would be, oh my gosh, the mayor has stopped people from peacefully protesting. Look, we've consistently said, and it sounds ironic, for those people who have been out there in the street for whatever reason, that you put yourself at risk. And we hope that you will be paying close attention to any signs or symptoms of COVID, and we're concerned about it. We are genuinely concerned about it. I don't know, Dr. Arwady, if you want to weigh in on this, but we're concerned about it. There literally been tens of thousands of people out in the street for the last almost 2 weeks, and many of them young people, but not all. I'm sure there are people there who are over 60, who have underlying medical conditions, the very things that we've been very clear of emphasizing. You must take extra precautions there. Did everybody that was out there wear a mask? No, they didn't. But in the midst of this righteous civic uprising, what would we have been as a city to try to say, no, you got to stay home, COVID-19? It's not my preference, but it's the reality of what happened on the streets.
I just have, if you'd let me,
Sure.
From A.D. Quigg from Cranes, MPEA estimates the International Manufacturing Technology Show canceled last week had an estimated $247 million impact alone. Taken together, you've talked a little bit about that today, the overall economic impact of the drop in convention business and in tourism.
I don't think we have good enough numbers to be able to opine about that, but obviously it's been significant. Literally, the convention business started dropping off back in early March, I may be even as early as February. The cancellation started because people were coming from all parts of the country and all parts of the world, particularly those folks organizations that may have had a large membership on the coast where they got hit before we did. They, I think, wisely chose not to gather in mass anywhere. And in Chicago, we've definitely been hit. It's pretty significant, but I don't have the final numbers at my fingertips to be able to assess it, but we're happy to track that down and get it to you.
Lala as well. I mean, there's a lot of money that comes from Lala.
Yes, it does.
Dana Kozlov from CBS 2. Why haven't you instated city hiring freeze, at the very least, to mitigate current budget hemorrhaging? And when will residents know if you are going to raise property taxes?
Well, we have significantly slowed down our hiring. So I want to make sure that point is clear. And obviously, one of the tools that we can use is to do a hiring freeze, to eliminate vacancies, to put off significant hiring until the next cycle. But the reality is 2021 isn't looking great either. So we're going to have significant hill to climb there. But obviously, we are doing everything that we can to look everywhere to find efficiencies. There are clearly tools that we can use. But as I've said over and over again, it sounds like Dana's asking for a property tax increase. What I've said is, in this time, people are hurting. I mean, significantly hurting. Part of the reason why we place such emphasis on providing housing support is because renters and landlords are really in dire straits. And in this reality, the last thing that I want to do is raise property taxes. Now, I can't take that off the table, but it is truly the last thing that I want to do. And as our finance team can attest, when we talk about options, they know that that has to be at the end of the table. Bring me other options first and see what savings we can gain from that. We are hurting as a city. Landlords, renters, and workers. I mean, our entire economy has just been cut. The rug has been pulled out from under us because of the massive impact, not just on restaurants, hotels, service industry. Every single business has had impact. There are very few that have been thriving, maybe PPE providers, but very few that have actually been thriving through this really difficult time. And so we have to take the long view, of course. We have to look holistically, and we've started where we started last year, which is to look internally first before we go to the taxpayers and say, we need more from you. But we may have to have that conversation, but we're not there yet.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.